I think we're ready to go here. There we are. Sorry for the delay, but here we go. All right. Well, good morning. My name is Jonathan League. I am a family therapist, and I am the one who runs this channel and this page and does all this. And so welcome this morning. This is just a time to kind of chill out and hang out and have some coffee. Now, it's just really just an interactive conversation that I want to have with everyone. So let me just check these feeds, and I think we're good. All right. Well, good morning. If you are new here, this is actually a new thing. I'm going to start showing up every weekday morning around 10:30. We got started a little bit later today, but it's just a quick little coffee chat, with parents of adult children who are struggling, right? And today's question is this: what is the hardest boundary for you to hold with your adult child? Right? Because that's something that I talk with parents about all the time, right? It's this pattern of we're trying to set a boundary, but it's so difficult and it doesn't work out. So I'm curious, right? What are the boundaries that are difficult for you to hold with your adult child? One of the things that I see over and over is parents don't really struggle with knowing what boundaries they want to set, at least on the bigger level, right? They want their kid to do well. They want them to be independent. They want them to be responsible. They want them to do things like live on their own, right? Take care of themselves. And so a lot of their boundaries are leading towards that, right? Like you need to get a job. You need to clean up after yourself. You need to, make better choices. You need to figure out how to solve these problems. So it's not really like what the boundaries need to be. It's more about parents struggle with holding it, especially after their son or daughter gets upset, right? And typically what happens is they try to set that boundary, and then the anxiety sets in, the guilt starts, and then suddenly they're wondering, am I being too harsh? Should I give them one more chance? So the question is, have you ever found yourself in that position, right? You decide what you're going to do, and then your child's reaction, your adult child's reaction, makes you second guess yourself. That's what we're talking about today. And why are we talking about this? Well, it's important, right? As a family therapist, I see a lot of parents struggle with this, right? And they're often asking me about how do we set boundaries? How do we follow through? And yeah, it's a real question. So it's just a time to chat, and really I'm trying to connect with just that moment where it's really difficult to follow through, right? Because I've sat with parents with that. I've watched it happen, right? They're having a conversation with their adult child saying, okay, this needs to happen. This is what needs to happen. And then I'll watch that adult child get upset. They'll get anxious. They'll push back, and the parents really struggle with that, and they back down. So have you ever experienced that? Right? Has there ever been a time you're trying to set a boundary, set a limit, and it didn't work out? Right? So what is that thing? What is that thing that is hard for you to set a boundary around? Is it chores? Is it money? Is it around the car, the vehicle, them getting a job? Maybe the way they treat you, right? That's a boundary as well, right? What are the boundaries that are challenging for you to follow through with? And yeah, and none of them are wrong, right? I mean, I think it's more about prioritizing your boundaries. Um, for example, we were actually talking about this last night in the Facebook group. There was a parent who was really focused on the boundary of their adult child keeping their room clean, and that's fine. That's a fine boundary, especially if they need to learn how to clean up their space. They've never been able to do it before, right? Especially if it's about building a skill. But I was trying to direct them to that's probably a lower priority boundary, right? It's still important, but what about them moving towards independence, right? Getting a job, being able to learn how to be a good worker and being a good worker and building up a job, building up money, or maybe it's about addressing some of their mental health issues and getting into counseling and whatever it is. But that's what you want to think about. Like, if the boundary is about them taking control of their life, their responsibilities, right, moving forward, then you want to make sure that you don't get lost in the weeds, which I've seen a lot of parents do. Like, every week it's about take the trash out or something like that. And I'm like, hey, let's shoot a little bit bigger. Yes, it's nice if they take the trash out, and I don't want them disrespecting you, but that's not the hill to die on, if you get what I'm saying. So, does that relate? Is there a boundary that that you feel is more important, right? Is like higher on that that spectrum of importance, hierarchy, we'll call it. Now, I'll tell you, let's talk about this for a moment. When a parent and a child are sitting down in a conversation and they're talking about this is what needs to happen, right? These are the boundaries. This is what it looks like moving forward. And that conversation breaks down, right? Or the adult child just doesn't do it. Why does that happen? Why does that happen? Why do adult children not embrace those boundaries? In general, it's because they don't want to face what's going on, right? They don't want to face the responsibility. But then again, why is that happening, right? Are they anxious? Right? Are they afraid of failing? Right? Do they not understand the full situation? And so that brings up a really big point when it comes to boundaries, is the importance of understanding what's going on with your child. So I brought this up about talking about setting boundaries and setting limits, but a big thing that I teach, especially in the Facebook group, is when we have these talks, is it's important to connect with your adult child, meaning understand what's on their mind, what's on their heart, right? For them to understand where you're coming from. Because a lot of times parents are trying to set boundaries and they don't understand why there's the resistance, right? And if you don't understand the resistance, you might be taking the wrong direction, or you would take a different direction, such as if they're overwhelmed with anxiety, right? And they need to go get a job, but they're so socially anxious. They're really afraid of screwing up and looking badly, whatever it is. And so they're deathly afraid of going to an interview. If that's why they're resisting, if you know that, then you can take a different angle, right? You can talk about the anxiety, how to calm that anxiety, how to see the situation differently. Maybe you're practicing with them interviews, how to interview or something like that. And so it changes the approach. I mean, has anyone seen that before? Right? Seen where you're adult child was resisting a change, resisting, moving forward. And later you realized why they were doing it, right? They were anxious, they were afraid of failure, they didn't understand why it was important. I mean, that's valid. Sometimes it's hard to believe, like, how do you not know why this is important, why you need to learn this? But you don't know what you don't know, right? And if that's really where they're coming from, that's what you can work on. So from the adult child perspective, a lot of times that is what is happening, right? They don't want to face that responsibility, and they're doing whatever they can to avoid it. And sometimes that's direct. They'll push back, right? They'll argue, they'll yell, they'll just flat out refuse. And other times it's agreement, but then they drop back into their old patterns and never do anything, right? But it's that avoidance. What about for parents, right? Think about yourself, right? Those moments when parents say, okay, here's the line, here's the limit, here's the boundary, here's what needs to happen, and they don't follow through, right? They back up, back off. Why? Why does that happen? Right? A lot of times, what's going on in a parent's mind is they're thinking, am I being too harsh? Am I going to cause harm to the relationship? Is my child not going to talk to me anymore? Right? And those kind of thoughts cause them to, okay, maybe I should just wait. Maybe I should pause here for a moment and not focus on following through. But what about for you, right? If you are remembering one of those moments where you were setting a limit and then not able to follow through, what was going on in that for you? Like, why does that happen? I think that's a very important question, right? Because your fears, your concerns, that's going to come up again. It's very likely going to come up again next time you try to set a boundary. So if you haven't addressed, why am I doing this? And am I really being too harsh, or am I being loving? Is this what my child needs? Is this the right place to hold the line? Or do I need to change my approach, right? You need to have that worked out so you don't get in that position where you're backing down. And let's be valid. Maybe your approach does need to change, right? Maybe the boundary isn't where it needs to be, right? But that's something that you want to figure out. And honestly, it's better figured out in conversations even with your adult child, right? Being able to talk about what are the next steps and having some agreement on it. So here's the question. It's just out there for today. We can go anywhere if anyone else is popping on here, but it's what's the hardest boundary for you to hold on to with your adult child? So I'll give you an example. There was a young adult male that I was working with. I was working with the family. And there was a pattern that was happening, which is basically he was doing nothing, right? He was just staying in his room all day. His room was a wreck. It was a mess. And he was just on the internet, right? Mom didn't even really know what he was doing. And we had this conversation. I was able to witness the conversation between the two of them. And they were supposed to talk about moving forward. And it was already defined, right? He needed to get a job. He needed to make money. Eventually, he needed to save that money and start working towards an apartment and cleaning up his place. And, they had talked about all these things many, many times, actually for years. And they were having this conversation again because nothing had happened. He was still in his room, still doing nothing. And the mom was being very clear, very kind, but firm, right? Saying, this is serious. This is a big deal. You have to do this. And I was really proud of her, right? She had a really good approach in the way she was saying it, being firm, being clear, being serious about it. But as she was delivering this message, I saw something shift in her son, right? He started like holding his head. He was getting anxious. He was moving his knee around. He started breathing really heavy. He was getting angry. He was getting upset. He looked anxious. And after a while, he just unleashed all that on his mom. And he said, I told you I'm doing research. You're pushing me too hard. You're driving me crazy. You're going to make me depressed. You're going to make me anxious. I can't handle all this pressure. Why do you do this to me? I told you I'm doing research. And he kept saying that over and over. Research, I guess research of a job, research of his future plan or whatever it was. And as he pushed back on the mom, I saw her shrink, right? And it's not because she was a weak person, but I could see the wheels spinning in her head, right? She was thinking like, am I hurting him? Is this too much, right? Is he not going to talk to me? I mean, she was getting really worried. And when she talked about it, this was interesting, right? As we were kind of talking about what happened and why she was backing down, she said, I feel like some of this is my fault. And I had to ask her, I said, what do you mean some of this is your fault? And she goes, I feel like I've enabled him. I've let him stay in that room. I've given him chance after chance after chance. And now I'm not even sure if he's capable of it, right? And so, she wasn't able to hold that line of we need to get a job, you need to clean up, you need to do this stuff. She wasn't able to hold that line because she was worried that this was her fault and that she was being too harsh, and she was lost in that moment, right? And so what happened was the same pattern, really, right? She backed off because things softened. He exploded. She apologized, and then what happened was then he softened too, and he's like, you know what? I'm gonna do better. Things are gonna be better. Just trust me. She said, okay, I'll trust you. And they had a little loving moment, and then they left it alone. And guess what happened? Right? Because nothing really changed. It went right back to the same thing. Right? Maybe he tried a little bit. Maybe he looked for some jobs or something, but in the beginning, it ended up him just back in his room, not doing anything until it blew up again. And then they're going to have this conversation, right? So that's kind of a glimpse of what I'm talking about, right? It's the angst and the tension and the fear and the worry that goes on in a parent that causes them not to follow through. And now for that young man, he needed to move forward, but in his mind, he was really struggling with his anxiety, right? He had jobs, lost jobs, tried before. He was older. His friends were further ahead than he was. And all of this was truly overwhelming. Like every time he thought about, okay, I got to get out there and I got to catch up and I got to fix things and I got to move forward. And it became very overwhelming for him and he just shut down. But the pattern that we were seeing is he was kind of learning that if he pushed back, right, if he stayed focused on his fear and why he couldn't be pushed, right, then his parents would back down. So they were in a very stuck place. Right? Can anyone identify with that? Right? You ever been in that thing? Like, okay, that situation where you're like, am I doing the right thing? So, I'll take the story a little further while we're talking about it. Uh, one of the changes, well, actually, several changes that needed to happen in that story, right? That was one, the mom needed to address her fears, right? That idea that this was her fault, that she had some blame in how things have developed. And basically, we talked about it. Like that was not helpful. What was helpful was him moving forward. He had to move forward. So, uh, worrying about who caused what was not going to help, right? And her blaming herself when he needed her to be strong and to hold those boundaries so that he could walk into his adult life, right? So really addressing her fears. And another thing in the pattern is after they would have these blow ups and these talks and then it would go back to the way it was. Part of that was they did not visit it again, right? The mom would just completely be hands off, and the dad was not very involved in too. So we got the dad more involved, the mom more involved. Like, hey, we need to talk about this on a regular basis. You need to check in with your son. You need to have a way to know whether movement is happening, not just like let him crawl back in his room for weeks on end. Now, they didn't want to do that at first because he's going to blow up, right? He's going to get anxious. He's going to get so overwhelmed that we're talking about this. They said, well, we can find better ways to talk to him, to address his anxiety, his lack of self-esteem, but you still have to talk. And so many times that's enough to start making change happen. Now, why do I say that? Right? Because it's kind of like a natural consequence, right? It's certainly the opposite of what their son was trying to do, what a lot of adult children are trying to do there. Is they're trying to avoid, not face things, right? And so they don't want to deal with the reality and the consequence, which is part of that reality of where they are. So when other caring people keep bringing it up, right, it's not allowing them to avoid. They're consistently having to face that reality in every one of those conversations, right? So in some people, some adult children, in their mind, it's like, I can just avoid this, right? If I just avoid it, it's going to go away. And then kind of in a delusional fairy tale land, maybe it'll all work out in the future or something like that. I just know I don't need to deal with it right now, right? And then they're able to have relief. They're able to have peace when they are scrolling on their phone instantly, when they're hanging out with their friends and not dealing with reality, when they're doing whatever they're doing, especially if substances are involved. And when the parents get in there and talk and say, no, we're going to deal with this. We're not going to let it go. How's this goal going? How's this goal going? Here's what we agreed upon. Here's what's going to happen, right? It doesn't allow them. It makes it much harder for them to get into that avoidance zone. And for many of them, especially when it's boundaries with encouragement, that's enough where like, okay, you know what? I'm not going to get out of this. I might as well take this next little step, right? And when the next steps feel achievable, they're more likely to take those. And so that's important. And feel free, anyone, whether you're watching this now or later, if you have thoughts and comments about that, right? Because that gets kind of into a loaded area. For example, is that doing too much for your children, right? If you're checking in constantly, you're reminding them, you're pushing them forward. Is that too much? Right? Is that stuff they should be doing for themselves? Is that possibly enabling? Right? The parents are making it happen instead of the adult child. That's a real question. What do you think? Of course, the answer to questions like that is it really depends, right? It really depends on what the parents are doing, how they're doing it, what the kid's doing, and all that type of stuff. In the beginning, uh, it's it's not enabling if you're pushing them towards growth, right? It's not really controlling if you do it in the right way. Yes, there's a matter of control, but you're focusing more on what you control and saying, hey, we're not going to do this for you anymore, and we want you to be successful. And in the beginning, a lot of times that's what it's like. So many conversations being on them, but over time, that's got to change, right? As soon as they start showing they can handle something for themselves, then the parents need to back off, right? That's where it either becomes controlling or enabling or both, right? The parents not finding that balance. So I can't tell you how many times I've been working with a situation with an adult child and the family, an adult child who's struggling, and the adult, right, their child starts making progress, right? They start getting a job, they start making money, they start making better decisions, and they're showing they can do it. But the parents are so afraid that it's going to go back to the way it was that they can't let go, right? And so I've many times had to have that conversation with parents, and I say, respectfully, you need to back off, right? They're doing it. Maybe they're not doing it like you would do it. Maybe it's not, it doesn't look the best form, the best version, but they're doing it. You need to back off and let them work on this and struggle. And sometimes you back off and they start to fall back into an old pattern. Well, you step back in, right? You're helping, you're supporting, you're encouraging. But that's just, it's a difficult balance. Difficult balance to have. No. And by the way, that story I gave of the young man who really pushed back, and then the mom who felt like she was to blame for some of why things were, and they were stuck in that pattern. They were able to move past that, and where they are today is so much better than where they were before, right? And that's a big thing you have to look at many times. Is it moving forward, right? Is it moving forward? Okay, well, I am going to take a stop here because I need to get to some other things, but this is the beginning, right? This is just a chat time. Today, it was me chatting, which is totally okay. It was just a start to things. So I will be back. We're going to be doing this weekdays closer to 10:30 in the morning, and it's just it's an open forum to talk a little bit more directly about parents, for parents, but for their adult children when they're struggling, failure to launch situations, what have you. If you want more support, more help, you can go to my, the Facebook group, and I can put that in the chat as well. And also, it's a private Facebook group, by the way. And then the email list. Get on my email list. That's where we make a lot of announcements and a lot of tools that I send to you as soon as you get on that email list. So, hey, thank you for watching. I am going to take a break and put this down. So we'll talk to you tomorrow around 10:30.